Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on the Sunrise, and welcome to the second hour of my show. Now, I'm very, very excited to be here because we're talking about one of the hidden crises in England, right? Something that's very serious, something that really needs to be taken most seriously because it is in fact a hidden crisis. Now, obviously, what I'm talking about is the rise in women sleeping rough in England and also homelessness, which is specifically risen during the pandemic. And obviously, I will get into detail about why it has risen, why it happened, and what are the causes leading to it as well. But before that, I actually want to quickly remind you that you can be a part of this show. All you have to do is just text me on 07852473473. And if you didn't get the number, well, the number is on a banner right down right below this. So make sure you go check out, make sure you text me on that. So you can be a part of this conversation, right? Because like I said, Relax Radio is all about you. It's about your perspectives. It's about what you think, what you want to hear, and everything you want to know as well. So make sure you text me on that number, because that way you can actually be a part of this conversation. You can be a part of this experience as well. So make sure you get in touch with me, because I would love to hear from you. But also make sure to follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because we have a lot of interesting content out there, especially tips you can use to feel better during the pandemic, how things you can do during or rather things you can do while you're stuck at home in lockdown, and also other things that you can do, for example, how to be joyful and different things like that. Okay, we have a lot of tips as well, so make sure you go follow us, because I know it's definitely going to help you have a better time while you're stuck at home during lockdown. So make sure you go follow us, because that way you can be a part of the show, you can be updated on everything that is going on as well. But also, more importantly, you can use it to help yourself, so make sure you do that. Now, also very very quick reminder that our app rather is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and you can download it on both your iOS device and your Android device, or whatever device that you want to. Okay, which means that the best part about it is that you can listen to our conversations at any time of the day. You can listen to our conversations at regardless of whether it's 3 a.m., 12 p.m., 9 p.m., whatever time it is, you can be a part of that conversation. So definitely make sure you download the app, because you can listen to us from anywhere in the world at any time of the day, and that is definitely going to help you find some time to actually find some time to do something else with your life while you're stuck at home. There are different things you can try out, and one of them is obviously downloading Relax Radio. So make sure you do that, because it's definitely going to help you. Now, let's actually get into this conversation about the rise in women sleeping rough in England, right? Now, charities out there actually warn that it is, in fact, a hidden crisis in England, that the numbers have been rising steadily for the past 5 years, but there has been such little that has been done to actually deal with it. There has been such little that has been done to address this issue and make sure that the numbers have increased. Now, like I said, charity reports actually increase. Charity report shows that there has been an increase in overall rough sleeping in London, up by 35% in 5 years. Now, more than 11,000 people were actually counted as sleeping rough in the capital from April 2020 to March 2021, and which is a 3% increase on the previous year, despite the push to get everyone in last spring. Not right now, obviously, there was this whole program to try and get a to try and make sure that we could eradicate homelessness, to try and make sure that everyone had some form of shelter, especially with the pandemic and winter and everything that happened last year. So obviously, despite all of that, there was still a 3% increase when it came to all the people who were sleeping rough. Right now, the homelessness charity crisis actually described the figures as dreadful, because obviously it is, and said that it showed progress resulting from the push to house people in hotels at the start of the pandemic was in imminent danger of actually being lost. So even though there was all these there were all these steps and everything that were taken to try and make sure that a lot of people were housed in the middle of a pandemic, those weren't actually, it did help at the beginning, but right now it's in the imminent danger of being lost. So obviously that is something that needs to be addressed as well. Now, after plateauing between 2014 and 2017, rough sleeping has obviously risen very sharply since, right? It has been rising sharply. And like I said, it has been increasing by 35% in the past 5 years. So the number of people counted sleeping in parks, doorways, and other places not designated was almost double the number in 2011. So, like I said, when you're seeing so many people sleeping out on the streets, when these numbers are doubling, even though we have taken certain steps, and that just needs, or that just shows us that when it comes to people sleeping out, we need to start tackling the problem from the root cause itself. The reason for homelessness, the reason for sleeping rough is actually things like poverty, or domestic violence, domestic abuse, especially when it comes to women. So because of that, it's very, very important that we try to address this problem from the root cause itself, so that way we can actually make sure that we are dealing with the problem, that we're actually addressing the problem. Because it's important to understand that no matter how much of money you put into the system, no matter how much of other options and alternatives that you try to create to deal the problem, if we don't try to solve the problem at its root cause itself, then it's not really going to get better for any of us, right? In fact, the situation is just going to exacerbate, and we're not necessarily going to find an answer to homelessness. Now, the figures which are commissioned by the Greater London Authority, which are also considered the UK's most comprehensive data about rough sleeping, actually showed that it had doubled. And the fact of the matter is, like I said, we have to start addressing the problem at root cause. Now, charities said that the figures showed by the battle against rough sleeping was at a precipice with last month's lifting of the eviction ban. Now, the winding down of of furlough and a chronic shortage of affordable housing, all actually increase the threat. So, like I said, last year, since the pandemic, house prices have gone up. There has been inflation. Things are uh, definitely more expensive than it used to be. And because of all these problems, people who are poor, people who are out on the streets, are finding it very hard to survive as well. And even though the government took certain steps, even though a lot of these charities as well do a lot of funding when it comes to rough sleeping, when it comes to homelessness, the thing is there has been an increase in rough sleepers, right? So obviously what that means is, even though you are contributing, if the numbers are increasing drastically, you need to understand the system can also only just cater to a certain amount, right? For example, if you estimated 5,000 people who are sleeping rough, but then somehow in the middle of the pandemic it had become 7,500, then where are you going to find that extra shelter? Where are you going to find that we're going to find extra shelter for all those people, extra additional 2,500 people who are new to this count? Now, like I said, there is in fact a lot of issues when it comes to this data as well, especially if you take how many women are in the statistics. Now, a lot of women actually sleep in places that you can't really see, right? Which I will get into in a few more minutes. But the thing is, because they sleep in places like that, that they're not actually counted in all those statistics. They're not taken into consideration in those statistics. And because that is the case, because you aren't considering them in your statistics, the numbers might actually be different. And we know it is different because, like I said, there was 7,500, but there was only 5,000 people that were counted for. So obviously, in instances like that, we have this question, then how are we going to tackle this problem of homelessness? Because we don't really count the full number. Because, like I said, when it comes to women, when it comes to certain people, they sleep in places that you don't really look into. For example, which I will get into a few minutes. But there are a lot of places that people don't get into as well. So, or the people don't look into rather as well. So, when it comes to instances like that, when it comes to situations like that, we know that there is in fact this gap between the actual statistic versus the statistic that is found and reported. Because, like I said, there are a lot of issues that are there. Now, another thing that actually needs to be addressed is during the pandemic, we've seen a steady rise in domestic violence, right? So, obviously, when it comes to people sleeping out, people who are homeless, domestic violence is in fact a contributor to this as well. Because, I mean, when you're stuck in a pandemic, especially when we're in the middle of lockdown, it's very very hard to sort of live with your abuser, right? And remember and what we need to keep in mind is the fact that before the pandemic, our abusers went to work, which meant that the time we spent with them was in fact very very minimum, because you didn't have to meet them all the time, you didn't have to see their faces. But if you're living with your abuser, for example, if your parents are abusive, if your partner is abusive, and things like that, now since we're spending all of our time with said person in lockdown, then that means that domestic violence has in fact risen, because we are stuck with that person who's abusing us, right? And because it's very hard to tackle issues like domestic violence, domestic abuse, because there is a lot of gray area when it comes to it. Sometimes it's hard to even realize that you're being abused. Sometimes when you do want to report the fact that you're being abused, you get threatened. So there is the fear of your life. And there are so many different things when it comes to domestic abuse. But we know that this has actually been one of the biggest contributors as well to homelessness, to sleeping rough during or rather to rough sleeping during the pandemic. And we will be getting into detail about all of that. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because like I said, we have a lot of interesting things to talk about, especially when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to rough sleeping. This is a hidden crisis in the United Kingdom. And when it comes to this whole problem of rough sleeping as well, it's not just women, it's men as well. And these numbers in fact has increased. So obviously the government needs to come up with steps. They need to do a better job at actually addressing these issues. They need to do a better job at trying to make sure that they're addressing it, and to make sure that they can solve this problem and reach their targets of reducing homelessness, or even eradicating homelessness, right? But make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're going to head into a small break. But don't worry, because I'll be back in a few more minutes to actually talk to you about homelessness, rough sleeping, and what the government has done.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you've got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be? So that there's a goal. And then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account. And then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're
Yeah.
always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. so
Absolutely.
that's the struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different. Right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country. To be fair, different countries have different tax laws, so different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You
Right.
use all the tax efficiencies, and then you step up into different things.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he might say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much. A lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on the Sunrise, and welcome to the second hour of the show. Like I said, I'm very, very excited to be here because I have a lot of interesting content coming your way. I have a lot of interesting things that we'll be talking about as well, so make sure you stay tuned. But before I get into that conversation, I want to quickly remind you that you can follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can be a part of this conversation. You can contribute to this conversation, especially if you can relate to this relate to this conversation in terms of experience, in terms of experience or even your thoughts and opinions, make sure you do that. Okay, make sure you text me on 07852 473 473, because that way you can be a part of this conversation. And that's very, very, very important, because Relax Radio is all about you. It's about your perspective, it's about your thoughts and your opinions on everything that is going on in the world. So make sure you do that. But also, a very, very quick reminder that you can actually follow us, or rather, you can download our app, which is available on both iOS and Android devices. So make sure you do that, and make sure you follow our socials and text me and call me as well, okay? Because I would love to hear from you. But getting back into this conversation, we were talking about domestic abuse, we were talking about all the other problems that people had to face when it came to homelessness, when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to sleeping rough and whatnot, especially since we're talking about how there has been a rise in women who have been sleeping rough, because that is what we're talking about. you know make sure it's very, very important that we make sure we talk about some of the reasons as to why they're homelessness. Now, I said, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to poverty, there are so many issues that we haven't really dealt with. Some issues we need to deal with it at grassroots level. So when it comes to dealing with these issues at grassroots level, when it comes to dealing with these issues, to make sure that we're stopping or we're preventing or even reducing the number of homelessness, we need to talk about statistics. We need to see where we are right now, so we can actually change that narrative, and we can take more steps, and we can make ourselves more aware about what is going on. So let's actually talk about how these charities have actually warned that there is in fact a hidden crisis of women sleeping rough, with job losses in the hospitality sector and increasing domestic violence during the pandemic fueling this surge. Like I said, a lot of us lost jobs, a lot of people out there lost jobs, a lot of other people had to deal with increasing domestic violence, and because of the fact that they had to deal with all of this, obviously, they had to sort of become homeless, right? Because look, when you don't have a job, when you can't pay your rent, your essential services like electricity, water, and whatnot, and and in addition to that, if you're also being abused, then things are going to get really bad for you, things are going to get really hard and difficult for you as well. So obviously, the fact that a lot of women are experiencing this just goes to show that you know to actually divert your attention from what we're talking about right now, right? In addition to the fact that there is in fact a crisis when it comes to women rough sleeping, we also need to understand that a lot of these problems that a lot of women face, especially in the United Kingdom, are things that can be solved. These issues, they can be solved. It's just we haven't taken the necessary steps to solve those issues. It's not something undoable, it's not impossible. It's just you need to realize what exactly is wrong. You need to figure out why it's happening, what you can do to reduce it, and actually look into the statistics and come up with proper solutions that actually address the problem. Because look, it's very easy for you to like donate money, or to set a specific part of the budget to actually help certain charities, to help certain causes. But what's important is you need to make sure that you use this money. You need to make sure that this money is being put to actually make that situation much better, which is something we don't see happening here, right? It's very easy because we've seen like how many times we've had such huge amount of contributions, or huge amount of you know contributions actually, or how much of the budget we've actually saved for a certain industry, certain cause, or whatnot. But actually, even though we've spent so much money, or even though we've given them so much money, it hasn't actually made any change. It has made no change, and it hasn't really changed anything for anyone, or helped any of those people going through those causes as well. Now, that's the same when it comes to homelessness as well, right? Because look, there was in fact, there were some results, there were some positive results, obviously, when it came to housing all these homeless people, when it came to trying to reduce homelessness and whatnot. But the fact that these numbers still keep increasing, that the fact that these numbers have been increasing for the past 5 years, especially by 35%, just goes to show that maybe we're taking steps, maybe they're not the right steps, maybe we're not taking the right steps, because obviously, it's not really helping, and it's not really addressing this issue as well. So getting back into this conversation, right? Now, the homelessness charity Glassdoor said that between 2020 and 2021, 26% of those it supported were actually women, up from 19% from 2018 to 2019. So you can see that there is, in fact, a very significant increase in terms of the women that they have been supporting. Now, the New Horizon Youth Centre in London found that between April and June this year, 35% of its guests were, in fact, female, compared with the 10% in 2019. Okay, so in 2019 it was 10%, in 2021 it's 35%. So you really understand that there is, in fact, some issue, something wrong, because if your if all the resources were if all the resources, if we're using all these resources to make this issue better, if we're using all our resources to address this issue, but you don't really see any difference in this issue, because the numbers are just rising, money is just being donated, but what difference is it making? What kind of difference are we actually seeing? So obviously, we you need to understand that even though we have all these statistics, even though we have all these money and resources for it, the thing is it's not really working. It's really just not working at all. Now, St. Basil's, rather, which is a charity in West Midlands, actually found 35% of those using services under the Everyone In scheme were actually young women. Now, official rough sleeping statistics for England, which were released in February, show just 14% of rough sleepers were women. And the new figures for London show 16% were women. Right? Now, outreach workers fear women are not being included in official rough sleeping statistics, because, like I said, sometimes when it comes to these statistics, there's in fact this, there's a gap between the actual statistic versus the reported statistic. And I said that's because sometimes women are not counted in these statistics, because they sleep in places that you wouldn't normally look into. Right? Now, this is what I meant, because women are not being included in official rough sleeping statistics, because they often go inside when the counts are happening. Because they're seeking shelter on buses or staying in A&E departments for safety. So because of that, when it comes to the actual statistic of women who are sleeping rough, they haven't actually, they fear that they aren't actually getting the right amount. Now, the latest rough sleeping figures for London suggest that this widely praised initiative to get people off the street was actually overwhelmed by new rough sleepers. Now, like I said, the pandemic, domestic violence, loss of jobs, and all of these things have in fact contributed to increasing the number of rough sleepers, because of all the changes that people have had to face. Now, the latest rough sleeping figures for London, actually, like I said, showed that these statistics, or that these initiatives were in fact overwhelmed by the new amount of rough sleepers. Now, the council said that more than 5,000 people were accommodated at the peak of the Everyone In initiative, but the number of people bedding down in London for the first time had increased on the previous year. So, like I said, even though we're taking these initiatives, even though we have estimated a certain number of rough sleepers, those have increased because of the pandemic, because of domestic violence, because of all the other multitude of issues that these women have actually had to face. So obviously, that is something very, very important. That is something that we need to deal with right now, to make sure that we can address this issue right now. Because if we don't, the numbers are in fact going to keep on increasing, and it has been increasing for the past 5 years. So obviously, if we don't address this issue right now, it's in fact going to get worse. Now, the everyone in program, actually, to be quite honest though, if you're going to if we just compare the statistics, if we compare the statistics and we look into how much has changed or how little has changed, or if there has been any change, the everyone in program has actually been a huge success. And that's because and this was actually said by Rick Henderson, who is basically the chief executive at the National Homelessness Membership charity Homeless Link. But by design, it was basically an emergency measure, right? And today's news that over 7,500 people experienced sleeping rough in the capital for the first time in the past year actually shows that for our government to meet their target of ending rough sleeping by 2024, it must start to address the root problems of homelessness too. This is what I was telling you earlier as well. It's important that we address these root problems. It's important that we address what is actually causing this problem, to make sure we have enough to make sure we have enough alternatives, to make sure we have enough resources to donate and look into the problem as well, because it's something that we really, really need to look into. And it's very, very important that we look into it as well, because like I said, this crisis it's hidden, and it's in fact increasing. And if we don't really adjust to it, if we don't really look at it, then things are just going to get worse. It means that we'll just have to donate more and more and more, or even leave out more and more and more of the budget to address homelessness. But what will happen instead is homeless will not actually get addressed. Homelessness will just get worse because of the fact that we're not addressing the root cause of it. So make sure you stay tuned, because I'll be back after a small break to discuss this. But until then, make sure you stay tuned.
One of the easiest ways to increase your net worth is to ensure that you have higher cash flows. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to not buy things on hire purchase, not buy things over months and months because you can't afford them now, but you want it. It's kind of that delayed gratification. Rather than buy that couch, that car, that stereo, that computer, whatever item, and pay it off over 12, 24, 36 months at an interest rate, rather invest that money, make do with what you've got, and then after 12, 24, 36 months, take the money that you've now invested and buy that good. An asset could be anything that appreciates or reduces a tax bill. So it could still be a liability, but it reduces their tax bill. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities because that's out of our remit here. However, for our use or our purpose, what we are talking for the listeners here is, I would put this definition of an asset forward. An asset is anything that increases your income. Anything.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? When you are basically going out during a day, if you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods. They're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if that, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK.
and it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, mainly one because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay.
They're
I mean, yeah,
nice.
that's very important, right? Because
Very
you want
important,
cars, yeah.
Very important. And also, like, people see me in like calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, if you're just tuning in, I'm super glad you're here because we are in fact having a very, very important conversation. We're having this conversation about sleeping rough. We're talking about homelessness and how homelessness has in fact increased in the middle of this pandemic, and how it has in fact gotten much, much worse for a lot of women out there because of all the domestic violence, and also because of the fact that they've lost their jobs. So obviously that is what we're discussing. Now, just want to quickly remind you that you can also follow us on our socials, which is basically Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can actually be a part of my show. You can be, you can engage, you can engage in this conversation, you can be updated, and you can also be informed about what we're talking about. And I think that's very, very important in this day and age, especially because, there is a lot of misinformation, there is a lot of conspiracy theories and whatnot about everything that is happening right now in the world. So obviously the best way to stay informed is through Relax Radio, because we always give you the most accurate information. We always talk about everything from science to sports to technology, health, whatever it is that you name, we will be talking about all of it. So make sure you go follow us on our socials. That way you can be updated as well. And also make sure to download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and you can listen to us from anywhere in the world at any time you want as well. But let's actually get into this conversation about sleeping rough and whatnot. Right now, getting back into this conversation, like I said, councils were actually saying how the rough sleepers has in fact increased due to the pandemic and whatnot. And we were talking about the Everyone In program as well, and how that has in fact been successful because it has helped us to not completely solve the problem of homelessness, but it has helped us reduce homelessness for a bit, at least for a while, even though those numbers have risen again, right? But and something that needs to be understood is, if the government is going to, or if they want to actually achieve their target of ending rough sleeping by 2024, it actually needs to start addressing the root causes of homelessness. Now, John Sparks, who's actually the chief executive of Crisis, said that it's dreadful, and honestly it's dreadful to see an increase in the numbers of people sleeping on our streets. And especially in this past decade, rough sleeping manners have increased by a shocking 94%, and there is absolutely nothing inevitable about that. Now, Gemma Thepamolok, actually, who's also a senior caseworker at the Glassdoor, said that job loss was in fact a key cause of homelessness for women. Now, for example, or something else that she actually said as well, was that when she starts supporting these women, when she starts trying to help these women, something she notices is that there's always something much more than what they are showing. Right now, they might come in and tell them like, hey, the problem, the reason rather I'm homeless is because I've lost this job. But the more time she spends with them, the more she realizes that there is much more behind that story. Because she said that they may come to these services with problems such as losing a job, but other issues in their lives will soon become apparent, especially things like, domestic abuse. Now, Marie Van Haaskamp, actually from New Horizon, said that when it comes to men and women, they negotiate street homelessness quite differently. Now, women actually try not to stay visible at night, meaning that they do not appear in the data. And that's why, they negotiate homelessness very differently. Now, I want to tell you the story of one woman that was actually helped by Glassdoor. When she first moved to the United Kingdom 2 years ago from Romania, she was in fact a victim of modern slavery, because when she first arrived, and this was because she wasn't that good at English. And the more her English improved, the more she realized that she was actually being exploited, and she got a job elsewhere as a waitress. However, but even though she got this job, she actually lost that job because of the pandemic, and she couldn't actually find a way to pay rent. And because of that, she started getting a lot of threats, of violence, and that's how she ended up sleeping rough. So, like I said, there is a lot of issues when it comes to this problem. There is in fact a lot of issues that we need to address, that we need to make sure are addressed. Because you need to understand that when it comes to women especially, that homelessness is in fact the result of a multitude of problems, losing your job, domestic violence, exploitation, threats and things like that. And obviously, it's very scary when you're a woman and you're getting threats, especially if you're living alone. It's very hard, because how do you protect yourself? Because say if especially if you're poor, then chances are you're going to be exploited way more, right? So she eventually ended up leaving her apartment and started sleeping rough, because that was the that was better for her at that point than getting threats and being scared, right? But eventually she received support from the charity, and she was able to get universal credit. But she said that if she found the experience psychologically and physically very hard, and that she wished and she hoped that she would never have to go back to that experience. So obviously, rough sleeping is traumatizing as well. Like, I mean, how would you feel if you had to sleep on the streets, if you had to sort of if you didn't have a home? Well, how do you survive? And I think the issue is this. I think the issue is that we're so self-centered. We always think about our lives. We're thinking about what we're going to do next, what we're going to eat next. It's always about us. We never stop and think even for a minute about all these other people out there, all these other people who are going through so many other different problems, right? And believe me, for some of these people out there, things are actually quite hard, right? Because while we're thinking of our next meal, while we're thinking of our time to go sleep, these people are thinking of where they're going to sleep, rather, thinking of how are they going to survive in the middle of a pandemic. And also we need to keep in mind the fact that they're poor, they're homeless, right? So obviously, what about food? They don't have food, they don't have shelter. And food and shelter are in fact one of it's a need for a human being to survive. You need those things. So it is in fact very traumatizing as well. Now, New Horizon actually thought that it was seeing more women due to the increased levels of domestic violence during the pandemic. Now, normally, when it comes to situations of domestic violence, domestic abuse as well, young women or even women in general who experience it are in fact they're actually quite resourceful, because they find informal sleeping arrangements with their friends, or with their family or whatever, especially if they are in an abusive relationship, right? But obviously, with lockdown, with COVID, with people asked to social distance, and people being asked to not actually have strangers and invite strangers into their houses, obviously, um they found it very hard, because these these arrangements that they used to make could no longer be made, and these arrangements that they were normally, normally okay with, that they were normally comfortable with, weren't actually working out the same way, because we had a whole new set of restrictions. We had to restrict where we were going, and because of that, it has in fact led to like homelessness. It has led to women sleeping rough, because it's, chances are, you'd, even though it's scary, you would much rather be asleep on the streets than actually go and sort of live with someone who's constantly abusing you. Because look, no one wants to live in fear, no one wants to always worry about their safety. Like, look, you don't always want this question of, am I going to be killed, am I going to be hit, am I going to be tortured, at the back of their mind. No one wants to feel that, like, there's a reason torture is illegal. So when it comes to instances like that, it is in fact quite scary, because for a lot of these women out there, a lot of these women who used to have other sleeping arrangements, they can't actually do it. They can't actually have them the same way they used to. Things have changed a lot for them, right? And a third factor is that young women in normal times may actually be able to get early support, or it would be identified in college, or where youth services, but those services too closed due to coronavirus. So because those services closed as well, they haven't actually been able to get any of that help. They haven't been able to get the help that they needed, and they haven't been able to be diagnosed as well. Because chances are, if you were in an abusive environment, if you were experiencing abuse and whatnot, chances are you could have probably helped yourself. You could have gone and reported it. But obviously, because we're stuck at home and we're sometimes stuck with our abuses as well, we actually these women actually find it very, very hard to even address the fact that they're being abused. Because you're constantly stuck, right? Like, all your movements are being controlled, you can't do what you want to do. And regardless of the fact that your abuse is doing it, it's the same with lockdown as well. Because you can't go out the same way you used to. You can't really go out the same way you used to, right? And these lockdown, these restrictions themselves, those restrictions itself actually sort of dictated the way we lived and all of that. So because of that dictation, because of how we were told what, we didn't have a choice because it's a pandemic, right? But because of all of those things, it has actually gotten very, very hard. And the truth of the matter is that, like I said, it doesn't matter if you donate all these resources, or it doesn't matter how many resources you're giving. At the end of the day, if it's not helping to solve the problem, if it's not helping to address the issue, then what exactly is the point of it? Because like I said, homelessness has just gotten worse the past few years. The past 5 years, it has risen by 35%. And even to talk about some of the statistics we were talking about earlier, rates like where women needed help only 10% all the way back in 2018 and 29, but they need help 20 to 36%, if I'm not mistaken, right now. Just goes to show how significantly it has increased as well. So obviously, these are things that the government really needs to start looking into. Now, let's actually talk about what the United Kingdom government has done to tackle homelessness and what they're currently doing as well. So, we have this act called the Homelessness Reduction Act, which was introduced in 2017, which basically ensures that the people at risk of becoming homeless actually get help much more quickly, and with councils receiving funding to support them in these duties. So this is what I was talking about, right? Councils receive funding. It's all about reducing homelessness and whatnot. But the thing is, even though you're being funded, even though you're trying to give this money away, and you're trying to make infrastructure better for all these people who are homeless, it's not actually helping them out, right? Because like I said, it's if anything, they're just exacerbating the problem, because none of these problems seem to have been addressed. And like I said, addressing these problems from the grassroots level itself is definitely what is going to help right now. For now, another thing that they that they did was when the Homelessness Reduction Act came to force in 2017. Over 270,000 households have had their homelessness successfully prevented or relieved through, securing accommodation for more than 6 months. So obviously, the thing is, you can't actually criticize the government and say, look, like, you haven't done anything, because they have done something. It's just not enough, right? Because what you're doing needs to be done in a way that is much, much more helpful, that will, help all these people collectively. And because we have to reach this target of, not having any rough sleepers by 2024. It's already 2021, and it's July already. So we have about 2.5 years more to actually make sure that we can get rid of all these people who are homeless, to get rid of homelessness in general, that we can prevent shelter, we can make sure that these people are looked after and whatnot, right? So it's very, very important they do that. And something else that they've done is these investments that they have invested in, obviously bills on more than 700 million pounds that the government is spending on homelessness and rough sleeping this year. So this has also included 15 million in the Protect program scheme for councils, which required rather extra support from national required extra support during the national restrictions and throughout winter, to provide accommodation for rough sleepers as well. So like I said, they've taken certain steps, but it's just not enough, right? So it's a very important issue. It is in fact a hidden crisis in the United Kingdom, and it is something that needs to be dealt with as well. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because I'll be back in a few minutes to actually talk about something very, very interesting. Because Tracy Ellis Ross and Oprah Winfrey actually announced a TV show about black hair. So make sure you stay tuned, because I'll be back in a few more minutes to talk about it. But until then, stay tuned.